Episode 64, Final Battle for the Mushroom World. Antonio fell through the sky, wind whipping around him. He felt mildly annoyed. His son and his companions had yet to pose a serious threat to him, but they had been more persistent than he had expected. Knocking him off the observatory? That was inconvenient. He'd have to deal with them quickly before they could cause any more setbacks. He was falling down towards his command ship, and he focused his power to his feet to slow his fall. His enemies were dead. A single light spear to what remained of the comet observatory should do it. After that, he would sit back in the ashes of Koopa Central and watch the breaking of the stars. Bowser Jr. wished he could be up with his father, battling against the Grand Star. He had already swallowed his pride and asked Ludwig to teleport him up there, but his brother had refused.
"Don't you understand what's happening?"
he asked, glancing upwards at the lights flashing around the comet observatory.
"If we enter a battle this intense in the middle, we'll simply get in the way. Then we'll all die, instead of just them."
Bowser Jr. did not agree with Ludwig, both his opinion on entering the battle, nor his cynical outlook on the Mario Brothers' victory. Then again, though, he and Ludwig had seldom ever agreed on anything. Either way, he had no way of joining the battle. None of them had a way of getting up there except Ludwig, or maybe Larry. Ludwig doubted Larry's teleportation magic was powerful enough to move more than one person, and he doubted even more he'd agree to get involved in what was likely to be an extremely messy fight. Even though Bowser Jr.'s entire body was full of aches and pains from his intense fight against Skulls, he pushed those feelings back. If he wanted to prove himself worthy of the throne, a true heir to the Koopa throne despite only getting a chance at it through his father's favoritism, he had to prepare to offer up his life for the good of his people. That was the calling of a true king. Somebody fell from the sky, a man wrapped in a trench coat that fluttered around him like an amber-colored shadow. The man lighted down on the very top of the command ship, as if he had simply leapt down from a 1-foot-tall block and not fell from an impossible height, his coat making the slightest swish. The man was identical to the man who had appeared on every screen in Koopa Central. The Grand Star and the Slayer of Queen Laveria, Antonio.
"Everyone!"
Bowser Jr. shouted, loud enough that sparks flew from his mouth.
"He's here!" Junior,"
Lemmy said nervously, glancing from him to Antonio, who stood on the top of the ship like a dark sentinel.
"See? Can we do this? We gave everything we had in that last fight. This guy is supposed to be even stronger than him. If Luigi couldn't beat him, maybe he weakened him enough for us to deal the final stroke,"
Bowser Jr. replied, tightening his hand into a fist.
"Lemmy, this guy killed our mother. Are we really going to let everything Dad worked towards fall into his hands? Out of everyone in the world, this man is most deserving of our hatred,"
Ludwig said coolly.
"To destroy him, I'd work even with my most preeminent enemies." "Yeah, even I agree with that, and I make it my policy to avoid holding strong opinions,"
Larry added, igniting a blue flame around his wand.
"I'm ready to give it my all,"
Morton shouted, gripping his wand tightly.
"Then let's go,"
Bowser Jr. roared.
"Let's take him together."
The Koopalings ran forward as one, up the curve of the command ship up to the very top, where Antonio waited, as unfazed by their charge as a marble statue. As Bowser Jr. ran, he launched a fireball towards Antonio, who dissipated it with a slash of his blade. Jr. leapt towards Antonio and swung his fist towards the Grand Star. Antonio leapt over the fist and vaulted off Jr.'s arm, flipping over Jr. and landing with one boot on Iggy and Wendy's head, striking them with a crushing force twice the strength of the Mario Brothers. As they fell, Antonio's feet struck the ground, ducking under Roy's fist and uppercutting him, causing him to stagger back. Antonio swung around and launched a light spear towards Bowser Jr., who quickly darted into his shell as the projectile passed overhead, spinning himself at Antonio, who sidestepped it while slashing at Lemmy, knocking him to the ground. Morton flung himself at Antonio, trying to drove his fist into the Grand Star's chest, but Antonio managed to easily catch the large Koopa's fist in his smaller hand, grabbing it and flinging him to the ground. Suddenly a wide ring of glowing magic runes appeared circling Antonio, as Ludwig smirked.
"I am the man who decides your manner of death, Grand Star,"
he said, twirling his wand with a flourish.
"This spell was created by mages who fought in the wars against the Shadow Queen's army. It has a name I find quite appropriate. Death of 1000 Thwomps."
A glowing blue portal appeared high above Antonio, as Bowser Jr. watched. Ludwig. He had grown so powerful, but... A storm of thwomps poured out of the hole, hanging in the air like rain out of a dark cloud, hundreds of full-sized ones golden with magic energy. Antonio swept his hand through the air and glowed, thousands of strings of light flying from his body and slicing the thwomps to bits so they fell around him as harmless dust and pebbles. Iggy and Wendy each launched a blast at Antonio, but the Grand Star bent over backwards as the magic projectiles passed over him.
"Hey, Junior!"
Bowser Jr. heard Larry's voice whisper in his ear, and he glanced towards him.
"Look! I already failed terribly in my last fight with this guy, so how about I do something a little different this time?"
He twirled his wand in his hand and pointed it at Junior.
"I'm going to provide you the highest speed boost in my arsenal. Go get him for me, little brother."
"Yeah." Bowser Jr. nodded as Larry waved his wand over him. Bowser Jr. felt a cold feeling wash over his body as he began to glow with blue light. The Koopa Prince launched himself at Antonio with the speed of a rocket, pulling back his fist to smash it into Antonio's body, but Antonio coolly sidestepped him. Roaring, Bowser Jr. spun around and attacked Antonio with a flurry of punches, breathing fire which Antonio only blocked with his blades while he wove away from Junior's punches, each one missing him by just an inch. With cold intent in his blue eyes, Antonio delivered a crushing uppercut to Junior's chin, before slashing him across his chest and kicking him in the stomach, launching him several meters away.
"I'm surprised you had the skills to survive against Skulls, grandson of Morton,"
Antonio said coolly, as his right blade elongated into a sword.
"You will not be so lucky against me."
As Bowser Jr. propped himself up with his arm, unable to rise as pain shot through his body, he saw Antonio raise his arm up. His blade was glowing red, and suddenly Bowser Jr. knew what he was about to do.
"A high-level blade spell,"
he realized in horror, remembering his magic lessons with Kamek. He had never understood much about magic, he had been the worst of all the Koopa family at it, but he had paid a fair amount of attention to the descriptions of the mass destruction the most powerful spells produced. Given the power the Grand Star had demonstrated so far, one could assume that he could wield the most destructive powers known to mages worldwide. He had to move, absolutely had to if he wanted to live. But he had undertaken such a beating he couldn't even budge an inch.
"Junior!"
he heard Iggy's voice cry, as the lanky Koopaling spun him his shell, bashing into Junior and carrying both of them to the side as Antonio brought his arm down. There was a sound like a single sharp cut of wind as Antonio's blade cut through the command ship, slicing through the place where Junior had been only a second ago, the reaching through the entire command ship as if its size and armor meant nothing. The skyscrapers that had been directly in front of Antonio's blast, despite being far away from the top of the command ship, were split in half clean down the middle as the magical blast struck them. There was a painful grating sound, and, before Junior's astonished eyes, the command ship began to come apart. the two halves of the huge mothership began to drift away from each other, falling to the ground as Antonio hovered in space between them, his face an icy mask of calm. Bowser Jr. felt himself begin to slip as the half of the ship he was on began to tilt, no longer supported by his hovering engines. How had Antonio done this? This ship had to have been the size of the Imperial Citadel, but he had sliced it in half as if it had been a piece of paper.
His ill-temperedness would be absolutely vile with me if I let you die here, Koopalings.
Junior heard Cammy said as she flew next to him on her broom. The Magic Koopa must be stayed out of the battle to provide an easy escape for them.
Thanks, Cammy.
Bowser Jr. said as the falling chunk of ship spilled him into the air, as he watched Antonio hovered, surrounded in fiery light. Then everything faded away as the teleportation was completed. Princess Peach clasped her hands together as she gazed out of the huge windows on her command bridge, watching as the two massive halves of the Seven Stars command ship slowly fell to the ground. Beside her, Toadette gasped.
Princess?
She asked, her eyes wide.
What do we do now? If this guy can do all that, we can't give up.
Peach said, her eyes hard. She didn't know what had happened to Mario or Luigi. For all she knew, they had even been defeated, although she forced herself to hope.
Toadette. Yes, Princess. Give the order to every ship in the Mushroom Kingdom fleet, and relay the message to the Koopas in hope that they will help. I want every one of our ships to fire on the Grand Star. I'll summon the Z-Keeper.
Dreambird added.
With his power, we stand a chance. Everybody! We must give it our all.
Princess Peach said. She steeled herself, this was no time to run, no time to scream and hope Mario would hear her. She was the ruler of the Mushroom Kingdom. Her people depended on her.
All ships! Advance!
Rosalina hovered in space, the chunks of rock that formed the rings floating around her as she stared down at the huge blue and white sphere of the distant ice planet she had forced Mario and Bowser down to. Those two? They had survived longer than she had anticipated. The power of the Dream Stone was not to be underestimated. Rosalina closed her eyes. Mario. The thought of ending his life broke her heart, but nevertheless, everything was too far gone. Her, and the universe itself. She raised her scythe into the air, as a massive glowing power star appeared over it, shining as it emitted thousands of smaller stars which soared towards the planet. They would die here. And then, there would be silence. Mario opened his eyes, feeling cold all around him. The sky was above him, full of stars. By the looks of it, he was lying in some crater of ice. Of course, the ice planet. Rosalina's attack had knocked Bowser and him into the atmosphere. Mario lifted his arm. It still was glowing with the rainbow-colored light of the Dream Stone.
Bowser!
He called out, his voice echoing across the barren, frigid plain, and bouncing off the tall white mountains in the distance as he stood up.
Ha! I'm disappointed in you, Mario, expecting I'm been offed by a stupid attack like that.
Bowser rose, shaking snow off his glowing shell. The sky shone golden as meteors began to fall from the sky, glittering with starlight. Bowser crossed his arms.
Huh, now this is a fight. We haven't even landed a single hit yet.
Mario closed his eyes. He thought back to the biggest battles of his past, like the last time he had seen Bowser wield the Dreamstone's power. That had been one of his toughest fights, and he had only managed to win because he had had Luigi working beside him.
Bowser,
Mario said, his eyes flashing open.
We can't hold anything back. And we have to fight like we're one person. I know you'll hate that.
Bowser grumbled.
Humph. You're darn right I'll hate it, but I'll hate things even more when this starfall thingamajig destroys my empire and poofs my kids out of existence. I'll fight with you, Mario. One last time.
Mario smiled. The meteors continued to fall through the sky. They were close enough to make the ice glow like it was made of gold now, lighting up the night sky like a sunrise.
Offer accepted, Bowser,
he said, looking towards him and nodding.
Remember, Princess Peach is counting on us.
Some of the meteors had hit the ground a very miles away now, and the cataclysmic explosions shook the ground and swallowed up the mountains, the massive jagged peaks collapsing as the huge orbs of energy that emitted from the falling stars ate away at their cliffs. Sounds echoed through the hills and the sky grew brighter and brighter as more meteors streaked towards the ground, near enough to incinerate the strange duo. Mario and Bowser rocketed into the air, the force of their jumps smashing the ground. The star-like meteors were falling down around them, and Mario zigzagged his flight as he made his way above the clouds, dodging star after star as the meteors annihilated the ground below and turned it into a sea of golden explosions. A meteor came hurtling towards Mario, its light shining in his blue eyes, but Mario summoned his hammer and batted it away, while, beside him, Bowser blasted the starry projectiles away from him with a humongous blast of violet flame. Together, the two rivals blasted out of the atmosphere, where Rosalina hung in space, a massive power star hovering above her launching the meteors. Rosalina pointed her scythe at them and the huge star began to spin before launching itself at them. Mario summoned a burst of power, flipping over the massive spinning star while beside him, Bowser breathed fire from his mouth to rocket him upwards, leaving the star to pass beneath them and crash into the planet. There was a moment of silence before which a boom that seemed to echo through the void. A golden explosion consumed the whole planet, blasting chunks of rock throughout space and emitting a shockwave that launched Mario, Bowser, and Rosalina away.
Mario!
Bowser shouted as they flew through space, propelled by the shockwave of Rosalina's attack.
Brace yourself!
Huh? Mario asked, but before he could say anything, Bowser had grabbed him and hurled him full force right towards Rosalina. The force of Bowser's throw seemed to Mario to be twice of the strength of a launch star itself, and he flew so fast that light streaked behind him. Mario's hammer collided with Rosalina's scythe with a clash that sent shockwaves rippling throughout the void, as he struggled with her in a patch of space that was slashed with colored as clouds of glittering space dust drifted by.
You cannot oppose me,
Rosalina said as she pushed against Mario's hammer with the staff of her scythe.
4 centuries I have traveled the cosmos, mastering all the secrets of the stars themselves. Even the star spirits themselves would be helpless against me. Even if you would wield the Dream Stone, can you really hope to triumph? I've got to try, Rosalina,
Mario shouted back, putting all his force into his swing.
I am fighting for Peach, and Luigi. I'm not going to let you take that away from me. Mario!
Bowser's voice echoed through the nebulous clouds.
Take this!
A massive hole was blasted through the clouds as a shining fireball sped towards Mario, crashing into his hammer and igniting it was violet flame. Mario felt power coursing through it, unheard of, world-crushing power as the Dreamstone's energy surged through the hammer.
Rosalina! I'll prove to you that it isn't all hopeless.
Pulling the hammer back, he crashed it against the scythe. An explosion boomed around them, blasting the clouds of space dust back as the force of the blow launched Rosalina away. His eyes fiery with resolve, Mario blasted after her, with Bowser close behind. He was giving to pour every inch of his strength into this fight.
Luigi, I hope you re fighting as hard as I am.
Antonio hovered in the air, as, with a rumble, the two halves of the command ship hit the ground. The loss of his flagship did not bother him. Even 7 stars itself would no longer matter, soon. He watched as the fleet of ships, Mushroom, Koopa, and Neo Empire filled the horizon, advancing towards him. Ridiculous. No one could stop him now, not even if Morton Koopa Sr. crawled back to the land of the living. There was a thunderous rumble as thousands of bill blasters fired as one, a black cloud of missiles streaking towards Antonio with flames rocketing behind them. Useless. If the fighting techniques of his own son, or the might of Morton's descendants could not bring him down, how could this? He raised his hands, causing thousands of threads of light to shoot from his body. They sliced through the bullet bills as if they were clay, missiles falling to the ground in 2 halves as they met the shiny cloud of orange thread-thin lasers. Antonio stretched out his hands, focusing his power as countless light spears appeared around them, launching towards his enemies. The javelins of light stabbed through the battleships, slicing through multiple ones at the same time with enough force that they collapsed, before exploding on the horizon and filling it with fire. Entire warships with the power to crush fleets were being blown to bits at single strikes of his light spears, and every time the others fired he slashed his hands through the air, wielding his threads of light to block their way. The giant figure of the Z-Keeper flew up and in the distance, launching a massive blast towards him, but Antonio's light spear blasted through it and struck the deity, blasting him out of the sky. Antonio always felt his calmest in the haze of the battle. As the sky erupted into fire from the power of his blasts, he flew lower to the ground, eventually lighting down on the top of the Koopa troops' flagship. He stood on the top of the wide green dome amidst the sharp iron spikes, and surveyed the battlefield and the destruction he had caused. He had destroyed more than a dozen ships with his attack, and his fleet were still attacking. But to his surprise, they did not seem to be fractured. All the fleets were working as one despite the damage he had caused, and they were pushing back his own forces, destroying his advanced warships. How naive they were, thinking they could change things with simple brute force. He raised his right arm. It would be no hard feat for him to wipe out the entire armada, if he used his most powerful techniques. There was no place in the world for final acts of bravado. The starfall would end all of that foolishness forever. A voice rang through the sky.
Koopa troop! Attack!
Suddenly, people were swarming up the dome, Koopas, Goombas, and Shy Guys of all kinds, and with them were Toads, Piantas, Yoshis, and nearly every species under the sun. Some of them wore the grey uniforms of the Neo Empire, but they stood by the others with no thought of hostility, all united against their common enemy. Him. Antonio turned away from the fleet as the army surged up towards him.
If you wish to die, then come.
The summons to the Koopa dominance had been among the strangest Blue Shell had received, but then again, this had been a rather strange battle from the start. He had been in a fairly good mood despite the dire situation, since he had finally given the ex-General Flame something he had long deserved. When Grand General Sheldon had given the order for everyone still fit to battle to head to the Koopa dominance, he had been happy to fulfill the order, even though he knew that a battle like this would often lead to his death. Ah well. Most Koopas could not say they had fought against King Morton's Bane before. Even if he died, it would be an exciting end to a military career full of mundane servitude to incompetent superiors. Antonio stood on the top of the huge dome that rose above the entirety of the massive dreadnought, engaging the Mushroom and Koopa forces who had came there to engage him. He moved as if in a dance, striking, slashing, stabbing the dodging, never stopping moving for a second and never letting a single attack strike him. Blue Shell climbed up the dome as he saw a toad and a Goomba go flying through the air after being struck by one of Antonio's attacks, and hurled his boomerang with all his might. He knew that it would be futile, but perhaps, as part of a larger thing, he could do his part in service to king and country. Antonio ducked under an Ice Bro's glowing blue blast, kicked a toad in the chest, and sliced Blue Shell's boomerang in half without even glancing at it. A crowd of assorted fighters leapt at him, but he spun around, flinging them all off as lasers flew from his coat, zigzagging to strike everyone in sight. Blue Shell ducked and hid behind one of the dome's spikes as the lasers cut through everyone around him. If Antonio didn't notice him, maybe he'd survive. People were being cut down the second they got within 2 meters of Antonio, the lasers flying around the dome striking everyone in their paths.
All right, guys, let's take him.
Star shrooms flew through the air, letting crowds of fighters down to the dome. The Glitz Pit fighters leapt towards Antonio, as he swept his light strings towards them, knocking some down. But not all.
Feel the ray woofk!
Rock Hawk exclaimed, going into a flying kick towards Antonio. Antonio grabbed the pro fighter's boot and hurled him straight off the Koopa dominance, but the action caused him to lose his focus. As the light strings disappeared, the Toad Brigade leapt off the Star Shroom towards Antonio. Antonio spun around, laying into them with his blades, slicing through Banked Toad's pickaxes and leaping over Billy's martial arts leg sweep, kicking the Toad in the head. Clearing the last of the Toads off the dome with a sweep of his blade, Antonio turned around to meet Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong. He ducked underneath the big ape's fist while using his blade to fend off Diddy's peanut pop guns, kicking Donkey Kong in the chest before slashing his blade across him. Donkey Kong growled and swung his arm to smash Antonio in the face, but Antonio sliced at Donkey Kong's arm before his blow could connect. The huge gorilla's arm went flying off into the distance as Donkey Kong roared with pain, staggering back as he gripping the empty stump with his remaining arm.
No! Donkey!
Diddy shouted, blasting to his uncle with his jetpack and flying in front of him to protect him. Antonio coolly raised his arm.
None of you have the power to change which has been set in motion.
A mech piloted by Yoshi leapt through the air, launching a blue blast from its wrist cannon towards Antonio, but the Grand Star turned the laser away with his blast while hurling a spear that blasted out half the mech's torso, the momentum carrying it and Yoshi away. A Star Shroom whizzed past them, wind nearly blowing Antonio's cap off.
Bob-ombs away!
Wario shouted, peeking up out of the Star Shroom with Waluigi, who chuckled with a
Wahaha!
As they both aimed bazookas towards Antonio. They both unloaded a storm of bob-ombs towards the Grand Star, who deflected them all as the Star Shroom flew circles around him. Princess Daisy gripped the steering yoke, grinning as she pressed a button, opening the glass window. As Antonio worked on deflecting Wario and Waluigi's vicious attack, Daisy hurled a bob-omb of her own at him, hoping to disrupt his rhythm. As Antonio sliced the final bob-ombs in two, he swung his leg around to kick Daisy's bob-omb away, before pulling back his arm to hurl a light javelin right at the Star Shroom's center. A pink sphere hurled itself in front of Antonio, opening her eyes.
Phew!
Bombette gasped, her pigtail-lit fuse lit.
Got here just in time.
From where Blue Shell was sitting, it looked as if the pink bob-omb was sad, but determined just the same. Something he had heard about bob-ombs ran through his mind. This bob-omb wasn't planning to do that.
This is my final gift to you, Mario,
Bombette said. Antonio raised his arm to slay the pink bob-omb with a slash of his blade. Then Bombette exploded. A orange ball of flame lit up the sky, blasting the dome to bits as Blue Shell ran for cover, and launching Antonio across the sky. The Grand Star had locked his blades together, shielding himself from the blast, as the explosion launched him towards the roof of a skyscraper, still shining with neon lights. Koops watched the explosion booming on the roof of the Koopa Dominance. He closed his eyes, the other former partners of Mario joining him in silence. Bombette. He had never known her as well as the others like Goombario or Lady Bow, but he respected the Bob-omb woman for everything she had done. The technique she had used was one he had only heard rumors of. A forbidden explosion that the Bob-ombs were not allowed to speak of in public. He had heard stories of a Bob-omb who had been associated with Mario using it, a long time ago. While sentient Bob-ombs had the power to regenerate after an explosion, this explosion was so powerful it could only be used at the cost of the Bob-ombs' life.
It was an end, Koops thought, worthy of a hero.
Antonio went flying through the air, flung by the force of Bombette's explosion. As he landed on the skyscraper Koops was on, skidding until he almost reached the air.
"Let's go!"
Koops exclaimed.
"The Mario brothers are counting on us, remember? Let's give him everything we've got."
Goombario and Goombella leapt through the air, both attempting to head bonk Antonio, only for the Grand Star to bat them out of the air. Vivian appeared out of the shadows behind Antonio and aimed a fiery punch at his back, only for Antonio to anticipate and sidestep it, knocking Vivian down with a solid punch as he aimed a kick with sent Ms. Mouse flying. Watt unleashed a torrent of energy towards him, which Antonio leapt over, twisting in midair to avoid Cooper and Parakarry's flying shells. He landed hard on Flurry, forcing the Cloud Spirit to the ground, and slashed through the air at Lake Lester's spiny eggs, advancing towards the Lackey 2 and knocking him to the ground with a ferocious slash. He blocked Sushi's water blast with his blade and kicked the kindly Cheep Cheep in the face, before turning his cold blue gaze on Koops. Koops closed his eyes. Thoughts of his wife and children, praying for his return in Petalburg, flashed through his head as he entered her shell.
"This is for you, Koopy-Koo,"
he thought. Koops put everything he had into his shell, everything he had learned with Mario, all the training the Koopas had forced him to undergo, all of the more than 30 years of experience he had. His shell darted around the skyscraper, spinning around Antonio and shooting itself towards him, before flipping backwards through the air to narrowly avoid a flaming slash. As soon as he was back on the cement ground, he had shot himself towards his enemy again, and as Antonio lightly sidestepped, he spun himself around again, shooting towards the Grand Star with enough force that his shell kicked up stars. How long that deadly dance went on, not even Koops knew. But even he knew that his skills, not matter how great, would not be enough. Antonio kicked Koops' shell, knocking the Koopa high into the air and forcing him out of his shell. He summoned a light spear, spinning it around in his hand before pulling his arm back to hurl it straight towards Koops' heart. But before he could throw the deadly weapon, Antonio was bathed in magical light and disappeared. Antonio appeared floating high above the city, throwing his light spear which flew into the air and exploded high above the battle. Cammy narrowed her eyes, pointing her wand at him.
"I'm getting too old for this,"
she thought to herself.
"Imagine, fighting a battle at this level at my age. If Kamek could see me now, he'd split his sides laughing."
Antonio coldly turned his gaze towards Cammy, raising his arm and summoning another light spear. Cammy smiled. Really? Antonio was around the same age as she was. Likely he had used a combination of magic and science to preserve his physical appearance and strength at the level of his late 30s. If he fight like this at nearly 100. Cammy spun her wand in her hand once and launched her broom into the air, passing over the light spear, as she launched a huge magic blast towards Antonio. Antonio dodged in midair and flew towards Cammy, his blade trailing fire. Cammy gripped it tightly with one hand as she flew out of his way, while blasting at Antonio with another huge magic fireball. Antonio slashed the fireball with his blade so it dissipated, ducked under another one, and flew towards Cammy, hurling a light spear at her. Cammy twirled her wand into a circle, creating a portal which the light spear disappeared into, as she flew backwards, focusing her power inside of her. The spell she was about to cast. Well, she'd never recommend any aspiring Magikoopa to cast it, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Slashing her wand downwards, Cammy screamed,
"Gates of the underwear! Open!"
A green slash appeared in the air behind her, as a cold wind began to blow at her robes. What had previously just been a blank space above the city began to slide open like two massive robes, spilling green light into the city. Antonio said, closing his eye.
"Your mastery of the mystic arts is more than the equal of any mage in the old war, woman. But do you really think that your sorcery will be able to overcome my Godslayer magic?"
Ha ha ha! Cammy cackled.
"If you give your magic a ridiculous name like that, you're just asking for me to prove its weakness, don't you know?"
A massive cloud of boos and parabones burst from the ghostly gates, flying towards Antonio. They numbered within the millions, more undead than Cammy had ever seen in one place, each one bound to her control and ready to give their lives to bring Antonio. She was impressed with herself. Looks like she still had some spunk left, after all. Antonio slashed at the boos and dry bones with so much speed, his arms were a blur of flame. The light strings flew from his body, cutting through the boos with their blindingly bright glow. The undead swarmed around Antonio, but he swept his light strings around him, making them streak every which way like a spider laying down webs, disintegrating boos and slicing dry bones in half. Cammy saw somebody at her shoulder, a Magikoopa who glowed with a ghostly blue sheen.
"Ha! Did you really think I'd sit this fight out? My service to Lord Bowser is never ending. Even in death, it seems."
Kamek adjusted his glasses as he stared down Antonio.
My, Cammy, just what have you been getting up to? Antonio, the scourge of the Koopa Kingdom? Not even the old king could defeat him, and he was more powerful than all Bowser and his family put together. "It's complicated,"
Cammy replied.
"A very unpleasant business involving Queen Laveria's death, the preservation of the existence of the Koopa Kingdom, and the lives of just about everyone in existence."
"Goodness me!" Kamek said, as Antonio bisected the last dry bones with a slice of his flaming blade.
"You have been busy since I died, Cammy."
He laughed.
"And to think that in my youth, I thanked the stars I stayed behind in the castle babysitting Lord Bowser instead of fighting on the front lines. Ah well."
He raised his wand.
"Cammy, we're going to have to use the most powerful spell that we know. I will help you cast it, but it will be difficult. This is on the level of the Shadow Queen's magic."
"Humph.
Yes, you're right, Kamek."
Cammy nodded, realizing just how much she had missed her most trusted partner. Using that magic. It was a spell she had discovered deep within the library of the Palace of Shadow, in a black tome locked up by chains. It was the kind magic that could grind nations into dust, the magic that the Queen herself had unleashed upon the world in the Great War prior to her sealing within the 1,000-year door. As both Magikoopas raised their wands, a huge magic circle began to etch itself in the air behind them, a circle which contained within it a massive circle, square, and triangle, the three most crucial runes in the magic style practiced by Magikoopas. Surrounded the three shapes were dozens of smaller runes. some of the most powerful ever recorded in the enchanted books. As the circle glowed, black smoke poured from each of the shapes as earthquakes rumbled throughout Kupa Central, echoing the sound of cannon fire that still rippled across the sky as the allied fleets battled against Seven Stars' army.
Now this is a type of magic I have not faced before.
Antonio spoke, gazing at the circle, his trench coat flapping in the cold wind blowing out of the gates of the underwear, which still stood open behind the circle, enveloping it in a ghostly glow. Slowly, out of each shape, a reptilian head was clawing its way into the world. One red, one green, one bone white.
The triplet dragons have been reborn.
Cammy cackled, as each dragon opened its mouth, charging up a fireball.
Keep focused, Cammy,
Kamek warned.
If they break free, they'll be loose in the world again. We have to hold them so we can send them back to the land of the dead once they're done.
Nodding, Cammy gripped his wand with both hands, straining against the dragon's powerful wills as Hooktail, Gloomtail, and Bonetail continued charging up their fight. In front of him, bathed in the light of orange, green, and blue flame, Antonio extended both of his blades to their full lengths as his light strings spun around him, rotating to creating some sort of shield. The recoil of the blast was enough to knock both Magikoopas from their brooms and smash the circle and the gates of the underwear both. 3 gigantic fire blasts shot towards Antonio, striking him with a tricolored explosion that lit up the area in blinding light, the shockwave knocking the ships back as it hung over all of Kupa Center, nearly swallowing up even the Kupa dominance in its blast. There was soot on Antonio's clothes when the explosion cleared, and sweat dripping from his face. He stood on a tall skyscraper, which had been shaved shorter by the top levels being caught on the explosion's radius, gazing out at the city of Kupa Central, once the center of an empire that ruled the world, now a smoking ruin. He raised his right hand high into the air and summoned a blinding orange light, which slowly grew into a large star that began to spin around and around, faster and faster, as he looked out on all the people who were still daring to oppose him.
I will end this fight with my next blow,
he said aloud, his deep voice echoing around the city.
This attack is powerful enough to wipe all of New Dong City off the map. Submit to the authority of 7 stars.
Mario and Bowser flew through space, past countless multicolored planets and through nebulas which streaked through space like the strokes of an artist's brush, chasing Rosalina and firing blasts of light at her. They weaved right, left, up and down, as Rosalina sent golden stars spinning towards them. Mario felt the power coursing through his veins, just the same as when he used a fire flower or an invincibility star. The Dreamstone was just another power-up, nothing more, even if it possessed impossible cosmic power. Ducking under one of the spinning stars, Mario flew towards Bowser.
Hey, get ready!
He exclaimed, gripping Bowser's tail tightly in his hands.
Gway! W! What?
Bowser exclaimed as Mario began to spin him around and around, faster and faster and faster until he let go. Roaring, Bowser went flying towards Rosalina like a comet, pulling his fist back, as he laughed. Rosalina held her scythe horizontally to block Bowser's punch. But, as Mario watched, she had underestimated them both. Bowser's fist struck Rosalina's staff and echoed throughout outspace, as Bowser crashed Rosalina towards a planet, smashing her to the surface with a collision that sent out shockwaves that crumbled mountains, using his momentum from Mario's throw to smash her straight through the planet and out the other end. Sending fire to his feet, Mario launched himself through the hole going through the planet, firing a storm of fireballs as he moved at the speed of light, catching up to Bowser as Rosalina blocked his fireballs with a spin of his blast. They fought through space, moving so fast they scarcely seemed to be in a system for more than a blink of an eye. Mario's body moved on pure instinct, as moves he hadn't used for ages came back to him, as he dodged Rosalina's slashes and aimed fireballs in her while she dealt with Bowser, who was launching fireballs so large and powerful, had he launched them back in his own castle, they would have lit up the entire world.
Enough!
Rosalina cried, slashing with her scythe. Mario and Bowser both ducked underneath it as the energy wave it emitted sliced a planet clean in half. Mario pushed forward, swinging his glowing hammer and trading blows with Rosalina between the two massive halves of the world they had destroyed. Bowser blasted in, unleashing a storm of fireballs that Rosalina dodged gracefully, causing them to explode on the underside of one of the halves, detonating in a multicolored ball of a light that dwarfed even a nuclear blast. It was a very good thing, Mario thought, that the part of the galaxy they were fighting in had no intelligent species. They left the destroyed planet, fighting their way towards a huge glowing star. As they flew over the star's surface, Mario felt nothing aside from a slight heat, and as he flew close to the star's surface, the flames seemed to part like when a boat blasted through water. As he knocked away one of Rosalina's blasts, sidestepped an energy cutter, and hurled his hammer at her, which exploded, briefly surpassing even the star in light as Rosalina was flung back.
"Come on, Bowser!"
Mario shouted, flying away from the planet and summoning Fireball in his hands.
"You can do it! We're winning!" "Yeah, you bet we are!"
Bowser shouted, joining him in pursuit.
"Nobody messes with my family and gets away with it. Nobody, not even all-powerful space goddesses."
The Comet Observatory was in ruins, its ruin non-existent and its stately gardens covered in the scars of war. Cobal stood on the observatory's edge, looking out upon the city with the beacon, still intact, shining behind him, and the wind blowing at him. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses, he had lost them in the fight. Perhaps that was a bad thing. The spinning star in Antonio's hands, far below him, was glowing as if he was holding an actual star, as bright as the sun was when she looked it in the eye. He glanced at Luigi. His mentor was being propped up by Strike and Peasley.
"Luigi? Are you?"
Peasley asked, but Luigi shook his head.
I'm trying as hard as I can, Peasley."
Cobal heard him shout out.
"Gee! Give me a moment. I need to recover my Thunder Hand energy. I'll be just a few more minutes." "We don't have a few more minutes,"
Cobal thought as he stared at the glowing star in Antonio's hand. He didn't know a thing about magic, but based off everything he had seen from Antonio so far, it would be bad. Probably worse than anything the Grand Star had done yet, enough to end the entire attack with a single blow. Cobal remembered when he had been younger. He had been standing up the Koopas before he had even hit his teens. Sometimes he had got away with it, most often he had only ended up with a sore back. Still, Luigi had given him power. He had become someone. He had thought he had had the power to make a difference. But in the end, who was he? He was still just Cobal the Yoshi, 19 years old as of 3 months ago. This man was a legend, a master of combat. He was giving it his all to end their lives. Even if he was nothing, wasn't it his duty to give it his all to oppose him? No, he wouldn't do what Rosalina had suggested and sit back and accept his fate. He would save his life, save the lives of his father and his friends, make K. Rool's sacrifice worthwhile. But how? Cobal turned around. The light of the beacon nearly blinded him, pulsing with power. Behind him, he knew Antonio's attack shone with even more intensity, an attack that would put an end to everything that had worked towards, all their hopes and dreams, in one cruel second. Then Cobal took a risk, the greatest risk he had ever taken before. To put things quite simply, he ate the beacon. It scalded his tongue as it touched it, and while Yoshi's had always had the ability to swallow things many times their own size, it barely fit in his jaws. It was like lava as it went down his throat, and Cobal wanted to scream even if he could not open his mouth. It sat in his stomach like an explosion caught in an endless loop, and as it left his body in the form of an egg, it was like 1,000 swords were punching their way out of his body. Cobal nearly collapsed, but he caught himself. The egg was larger than him and glowing with pulsing colors, yet despite his size, he could easily lift it. Luigi, Peasley, and Strike were looking at him with wide eyes, yes, even Luigi. And Cobal leapt. He ran to the edge of the observatory and leapt into open air, laughing as the wind whipped around him. He flung his arms out as he skydived towards Antonio, going into a flutter jump to bring himself closer until he was parallel with the grand star perched on the top of the skyscraper. For a moment, it seemed as if they locked eyes. Then, both of them flung their attacks at each other. The giant glowing egg and spinning orange star hit each other in midair, the shockwave blasting Cobal away. As he fell, he saw the projectiles, brilliantly shining like twin suns, straining against each other. Antonio's star spun like a saw, sending energy flying everywhere, but Yoshi eggs had been shaped by millennia of evolution to be the perfect projectiles. Slowly as first, but then faster and faster as Antonio's attack began to lose momentum, Cobal's beacon egg forced the glowing star higher and higher into the air, the cosmic energy that filled it giving it strength. It was a weapon fueled by the power source of a universe-traveling ship, and that same energy carried it higher and higher into the sky, above even the Comet Observatory. When both blasts finally exploded, the entire sky turned white with light as Cobal knew they exploded high in space. Finally scrumming to his exhaustion, Cobal closed his eyes. There was a smile on his face as he fell towards the streets of the burning city, sparks and ashes flying around him.
Ha ha! Did I finally impress you, Big L? Cobal!
Luigi thought as he stood at the observatory's edge, rays of light from the explosion shining down upon him.
You've surpassed all my expectations. You truly have become the same kind of hero me and my bro are.
Lightning flickered around him as Strike and Peasley stepped back. Even though he hadn't had a single mushroom, he felt re-energized and ready to jump back into the battle once again. He hadn't recharged much power yet, but he had back it enough. Pure electricity ran through his veins as he leapt forward.
It's Amy time!
Luigi exclaimed as lightning rocketed him forward on his boots, blue light flashing through the sky. Electricity trailed from his fist as Luigi blasted towards Antonio, a sonic boom radiating from him as he reached the skyscraper where his father stood. Antonio coolly raised a blade to block Luigi's blast, but he had underestimated his son's strength. Blue lightning crashed around them as the punch launched Antonio high into the air, and Luigi followed with another flare of his sapphire engines.
I can do this,
he thought.
Mario, Cobal, Daisy, Peach. I can do it.
Antonio hurled a light spear straight towards Luigi, but he dodged it, blasting himself further into the air as the explosion turned the ground into a sea of fire. Reaching his fire, Luigi aimed an uppercut at him, as Antonio caught his wrist, but Luigi had been expecting that and channeled lightning into his leg, kicking Antonio with all his might and knocking him through the sky.
So you are still attempting to defy me?
Antonio said coolly, extending both of his blades to full-length swords.
As you wish. I will destroy you, my rebellious son, with everything I've got.
Antonio launched himself through the sky at Luigi, his blade a huge flaming arc. Luigi ducked underneath and pulled him arm back to drive a fist into his father's stomach, only for Antonio to kick him hard and send him tumbling through the air, before slinging a light spear away. Luigi managed to get control of himself in time to dodge the light spear by a hair, launching himself at Antonio with fists alight with blue energy. Father and son came at each other, as Luigi recalled every fight he had ever fought, every move he had ever made, forcing his body to move at twice its normal speed, dodging Antonio's slices and meeting his blows at an even level. With each blow either of them made, the sound rang through the sky, and with each strike, the sky lit up with lights of orange and blue. They flew through the skies, higher and higher, until they rose above even the Comet Observatory in the chaotic dance of battle. Luigi felt his power fading away, but instead of panicking, he forced himself to go even further, putting more power into his swings, more speed into his dodges. He ducked under a light spear as Antonio kicking him through the air full force, unleashing thousands of light strings at him, but Luigi met them with a torrent of lightning, forcing the Grand Star to lock his blades to defend himself from the massive attack. Luigi could see Antonio was finally tiring. Sweat was pouring down his face, and his movements were slowing. As Luigi blasted back to Antonio, Antonio sidestepped his punch and flew backwards 10 meters, building up power in his right blade so it shone with red light. Meeting his father's cold gaze, Luigi summoned his power, summoning every inch of power he had left into it so it shone with blue light. With a final burst of speed, both Luigi and Antonio hurled themselves at each other, throwing all their power into one final attack. The entire sky lit up, half orange and half blue, as a massive boom echoed through all the dead towers of New Donk, as everyone fighting gazed up in awe at the battle occurring high above their heads. Luigi and his father fell together, down towards the Comet Observatory. He felt drained, like there was no energy at all left in his body, as he and Antonio fell, neither of them moving. When they hit the observatory ground, they both lay, and for how long, Luigi didn't know. The observatory floor was cold against Luigi's cheek, refreshing against all his cuts and burns. He wanted to lie down and sleep for hours, but he had to see this through. Luigi rose on shaky feet, so unsteady he felt as if even a gust of wind would knock him down. Across from him Antonio was also rising, still with that cold determination on his face but showing none of it on his body.
"You will not cut short my dream, boy,"
Antonio said, limping towards Luigi.
"Yeah. Same with me,"
he replied, approaching his father, each footstep sending pain through him. And they flung themselves at each other one last time. Their blows were weak and sloppy, like the blows of children and not trained warriors, as pain shot Luigi every time he moved one of his limbs and every inch of him felt ready to drop down from exhaustion, but still he continued to fight, as Antonio's blows struck him and he fought back in turn, struggling to raise his arm to bring his fist into his father's face as Antonio struck him in the chest. Both of them were growing weaker with every blow, their blows landing light and lighter until they were barely brushing each other, both one fighting more with their own body's exhaustion than each other. But still they fought, on the ruined platform that had once been called the Comet Observatory, as all the stars of heaven shone down upon them. Mario and Bowser rained down blows on Rosalina, pelted her with fireballs, and flew around and around her, dodging her attacks were expert precision. Rosalina was more powerful than they are, but she was not a fighter. Perhaps this was the first time she had ever gone all out, Mario thought. In comparison, Mario and Bowser were veterans of 1,000 battles, more skilled at adapting to new abilities than anyone else in the Mushroom World. Despite all that incredible cosmic power, Rosalina was being pushed back. Fighting as one, Mario and Bowser simultaneously smashed their fists against the staff of Rosalina's scythe. There was a sound that rang through all of their ears as the golden weapon shattered, the force of the blow sending Rosalina tumbling back.
"Yeah. Take that!"
Bowser shouted.
Is this enough?" Rosalina!
Mario shouted.
Please! Are you convinced now? Please! Just let us win!
Rosalina closed her eyes.
You, win? And let the power of the Star Children continue to fill the world with conflict and destruction? I am following my duty, Mario. Nothing less.
She slowly floated into the air and raised her hands.
You have forced me thus far,
she said.
If you had allowed me to use the starfall, many still would have lived, and those who died would have died quick and painlessly. But now you have left me with no other choice. Instead of the starfall, I will use the full force of my power to destroy the entire galaxy and everyone in it. The last moments of your world, Mario, will be moments of fear. I am deeply sorry, Mario and Bowser. May you and your loved ones find peace in the next world.
Light shone from Rosalina, surrounding her and forming into a pattern like a giant magic circle covered in strange star designs. She flew further and further as the circle only grew, until she hovered in the distance, the center of an intricate, beautiful pattern of light depicting the stars paying homage to the great star spirits as they rained justice down upon the universe. As the black of the void of space was dyed a brilliant, beautiful gold as it was filled with Rosalina's divine light, Mario truly understood just how powerful Rosalina really was.
Peach. Luigi.
Mario thought to himself as he stared at the goddess whose light filled his whole vision, like the sun rising upon the clear ocean surface.
I am sorry. I might not be able to come back, after all.